Yes, this is exactly really following on from Mark and Dave's presentation about collaboration in the cash supply chain. And the way we're going to do that in the next 30 minutes, and I'm glad we've got this. This is definitely the best slot of the day because we're heading into lunch. So I think we can all see the end of the morning in sight. We're going to break it into three parts. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about cash in the UK, where we see it as part of the payments suite, if you like. I'm going to talk a little bit about the cash cycle and the cash supply chain and where the inefficiencies are within that cycle. Then I'll hand over to Samir, who's going to talk about, from his Barclays banking perspective, what he's seeing the response / demand from customers is in response to the supply chain challenge, if you like, and how the industry is responding to those demands. And then finally, we're going to have a panel discussion with Malcolm, including Malcolm Mackey from Morrisons, so we can answer the questions that we planted in the audience. No, hopefully you'll come up with some interesting questions to see or to hear about the reality, if you like, of how supply chain collaboration is actually happening. So if I could just get the next slide up. I think you've all seen the headlines. Everyone's predicted the death of cash from when checks came out, credit cards, debit cards, mobile payments. Even my wife predicted the death of cash shortly before I joined Voltex, when I had a bit of an oh shit moment. I'd actually signed my contract to join Voltex as the commercial director. My wife came with a copy of one of the Sunday papers, and it had death of the folding stuff on it, and it was an article about how cash was going to be gone within the next few years. So one of the first things I did when I got to Voltex was to check out some of the stats, and there's a plethora of them, as you know, within all markets, but particularly in the UK, from the Bank of England, the Payments Council, people like that, who put out all these statistics which actually paint a far rosier picture of cash than I think we like to imagine. And in fact, as you can see here, still, in 2012, 54% of transactions were done in cash. In turnover terms, that's about 30%. And when you go across Europe, that rises to about 75%. And I was talking to quite a few of you last night at dinner about Ireland itself, and I'm glad to hear as well that cash is alive and well, by the sounds of it, in Northern Ireland. What are the drivers for the popularity of cash? I think cost of transaction is a really important one. These percentage figures here, let me convert those into something a bit more simple. The average cost of a cash transaction is 1.5 pence. I'll let Samir convert that into euros for you, but roughly the same. The average cost of a debit card transaction is about 9p, and a credit card transaction is a whopping 38p. So some very strong cost reasons as to why we think cash is holding up as a payment method in the economy. Also, there are some traditional reasons, as you'll all know, why people like cash. There's the anonymity of cash. And I always think about my two teenage sons who are technical whiz kids. I always go and ask them if I've got a problem with the iPad, iPhone, computer, straight to them, they sort it out. But actually both of them have large wads of cash which they collect from various birthdays and Christmases and things. They still like the feel of money, knowing what they've got, and there is a sort of psychological attachment to cash. And then there's a lot more evidence out there that through the recession, people have lent towards cash, particularly in times of low interest rates. I mean, I'm sure Malcolm can tell you about people who go to Morrisons, take cash out of the cash machine outside and use it as a budgeting tool when they're inside. So in other words, they match their shopping to the amount of cash in their hand, so as a budgeting tool. I hate to say this in front of Samir, but the mistrust of the banks, you know, there's been a lot of people who've started putting cash under the mattress, we think, using it as a store of value. So there's a whole raft of reasons why cash continues to be a very popular form of payment. And in fact, the Payments Council came out with a statistic that said there were 200 million more cash payments made in 2012 over 2011. So it's actually quite a mature value chain, the cash value chain. It's well understood, but there are quite a few inefficiencies in it. And I think this slide, if you can read it, shows the chain, starting with the Bank of England and the Royal Mint, who in the UK are pushing out notes and coin. Then you've got a variety of players in the cash chain, the retailers, the public, cash-in-transit companies, cash processors like ourselves, banks, and there's a whole heap of duplication going on at the moment in that chain. The actual counting of cash, I heard a statistic that, I forget which retailer it was, but they said that they count their cash 12 times within the store before it's handed over to a cash-in-transit company. And those cash-in-transit companies get involved in cash counting as well. We get involved in cash counting as cash processors. All of us have our own data supply, if you like, or data that we extract from this cash. So there's duplication in terms of the retail, cash-in-transit, bank, and cash processing company. So what we're suggesting here is a more collaborative, joined-up approach. Although cash is a relatively cheap form of payment compared to the other two that I mentioned, debit and credit cards, there's still some significant cost reductions to be made in this space. Just a little bit about us. I mean, I probably don't need to make much introduction for Barclays. They're quite dominant in all means of payment, paper, electronic, card and mobile, and they have a fairly large portfolio of financial institutions and retail clients whose cash they process. And we, as a joint venture, uniquely with Barclays and HSBC, we as Voltex process about just under 40% of all the cash that circulates in the UK. That's about 160 billion pounds a year. I think someone once told me if you put all that cash, wrapped it round the equator, it would go around 36 times or something. So it's a fairly big chunk of cash that we look after, and we do that through 17 sites across the UK, mainly note and a few coin centres as well. So coming back to the point, the cash is still the cheapest and most widely used form of payment, even according to the British Retail Consortium's recent survey, which kind of said cash is in decline, but still recognised it stood there as the cheapest and most widely used form. The cost of moving, we did a little calculation and said if you took cash and moved it to debit cards and credit cards, you're talking of an increased cost of 400 million for debit cards and 2 billion for credit cards. So I think that would create a nervousness among retailers and financial institutions in terms of the costs that's likely to incur. Officially, our cash payments are forecast to remain static to 2021. There's also the piece about time. It's about 3/4 of the time to get a cash sale through it as it is to get a card payment through. And I know that's very important to retailers, how much time you spend at the till and how quickly you can be got through. But I think the best illustration of cash is if you look at, historically, looking back 12 years, the 260 billion of cash transactions in the UK is a fairly steady picture. And I would say that that's going to continue, certainly for the next 10 years at least, despite what you may have heard about the death of cash and the rise of mobile technology. I'll now hand over to Samir, who's going to talk a little bit more about what the retail response has been and how the market is responding to that response in terms of the cash process.
Thanks, Mark. Am I on? Cool. So, bank's perspective. It's a tricky one because as a bank, we have our fingers in all pies. We do electronic, we do paper, and we are responsible for then evolving newer methods like mobile, ping it, which you must have heard about Barclays. However, having established that cash is here and here to stay, and having heard that repeatedly from clients like Malcolm and other people in the audience, it's about what can we do for cash. It's people coming and saying, there are inefficiencies in the chain. We recognize that now more than we ever did in the past. Why do my people have to touch cash so many times? Mark touched upon 12, numbers vary from 8, 16. Why? Why do I have to lose a day before I get my value? Can't you as a bank do something about giving us value sooner? Why do I have to work on fixed collection cycles? So can there not be a mechanism which can trigger a collection only when it's needed and not necessarily every third Friday of every month or whatever? And then there are points about security of cash. There are points about fraud, counterfeit identification at the point of sale. So all of these are essentially adding to the cost of doing business in cash. And if cash is here to stay, then the clients are asking us as banks, what can you do? Now, this is much more your domain than mine because it's happening in your environment. The retail crime and retail fraud. The thing I like about this slide here is even though the nature of fraud is changing, even though the nature of crime is changing, still there is about 30%, which is 26 and 4 of employee, a sizable chunk on the pie which needs to be addressed offline, which needs to be addressed through meeting the demands or just responding to the asks which have been put on us as bank. So going back to the ask, if I distill all of it in various conversations, I think the key ask comes to 3 things. Can I have more visibility of the cash across my supply chain from the time I have received a note from a client, my customer, till such time I have received value in my bank account? Can I exactly know where cash is at what point in time? And can I know what the time is as well? So can I have full visibility of that? Can I control parts of that? Can I say that my collections will happen then? Can I say that this is when I want my value? Can I say that this is where I draw my line? And can I have a little more control on my cash cycle? And finally, can we do something together with the other members of the supply chain to bring down cost? So it's give me visibility, give me control at a lower cost. Isn't that wonderful? In response to that, if I just think of the themes which we have seen emerging in the industry, going right back to what the client asks were, I think virtualization is emerging. And when I say virtualization, it's more about can we dissociate value of the asset, the movement of the asset, with the movement of value? Can we just do information exchange which enables everything else apart from physically owning the cash, whether it's value in client accounts, whether it's identification of what's in what store, float management, all of that. There is an emerging theme of integration. So the whole point is about how can we collaborate well with various members of the supply chain. And you can see the couple of us are together and there are more supply chain members in the audience. Can we collaborate? Can we integrate better to provide value to the end client? And the other emerging theme is information. I mean, the demands on us and on Mark and his team at Voltex about giving information to Malcolm, his team, and other clients is far more than it ever was, because people, again, in order to optimize, want to understand where inefficiencies are, and inefficiencies can best be recognized through identifying by information, by data, by understanding at store level, by understanding at till level, and where is a chance for us to optimize. So those are the key themes that we have seen emerging. Now, there is a raft of initiatives here on this slide which we have observed in the industry, and some we are partaking as well to provide benefit to our clients. I won't take you through all of these in detail, but the point is, if you look at where the industry is right now, if you look at how, as banks, as processors, as other members of the supply chain, how we are responding to those themes, I think it's right from the point a note is taken. So whether it's intelligent tills and safes, where a note goes securely in a point-of-sale device, volumatic for instance, to value which is given earlier than what it is given now, purely based on understanding what we expect from the client or getting a piece of information from one of those point-of-sale devices. Like I said, various things, you'll read through the slide, but there is a whole lot happening. And rather than me trying to talk through these, we have the privilege of having someone who experiences in his work environment, Malcolm. So why don't we hear from him as to how, as a retailer, they view the emergence of these themes. And with that, we get into a conversation with Morrisons.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Yes, thank you. Okay, so we're now going to open this up. I mean, you presented this as a very sort of progressive way of looking at this. To a certain extent, one might say, well, you would. So let's get a different perspective. Malcolm, your thoughts on this? I mean, you've been at the other end, I suppose, to some extent. Maybe you could just explain where you are in this, and then we can talk a little bit more about it, what you've been doing and how you've been involved. Yeah.
There we go.
So a couple of years ago, we were in a position where we were looking at very static sales, pretty much everything that the guys have talked about here, the cost of handling cash, the cost of handling cards. These were things that we couldn't control, really, so we needed to look at where we could take out costs from our business. So cost of handling cash was one of these things that we could do. We also wanted better visibility of the cash. So as Samir said and as Mark said, we've handled cash from the point of sale to the bank probably 12, 15 times, and maybe by half a dozen people. So there's an element of risk in there. So any of the loss prevention people in the room there, you know, when some money goes missing, then it's trying to pinpoint who's actually pocketed that money. And combining those two things, we were looking at technology and we were looking at our relationships with the bank and with the cash processors. So what we ended up looking at was a solution which allowed us to take the money at the point of sale, eliminate the risk of taking fraudulent notes, and store the money at the point of sale, which allowed us to cut the whole handling process from end to end out. So the last person that touches the money in our stores now is the cashier, and that now allows us to bank the money as it's presented to the cashier and basically know what we are banking. So previously we had lots and lots of instances of money going to the bank and we would get discrepancies back and we would have arguments with the bank, they would have arguments with us, it was our word against theirs, they're more secure than we are, we take the loss. And we really couldn't win that argument. So that was our principal reason for choosing the volumatic solution. I'm sure you've seen the stand out in the hall there. And that has now been rolled out across our business.
Now let's just break this down a second. I understand some of the benefits. How did you have internally within Morrisons a costing on this problem? Did you work out how much it cost? Or was it more a case of different elements coming together to identify gaps?
I think it was more the different elements coming together there. So we were looking at what we could actually control the cost on. So we broke it down into various areas, and we looked at where we'd been a few years ago and where we'd moved. So we've introduced new technology. We've basically taken out all the costs that we could until we got to the stage that cash was the only cost that we could actually influence anymore. So labour was a big cost in that. So yeah. Handling cash, obviously, you know, cheapest out of the three payment methods, but that was the only thing that we could actually influence.
So, okay, so you've decided that you've got a problem before you went to look for a supplier?
Yes.
Okay, so how did you go about finding a relevant or the best supplier?
There were various suppliers in the market, and we had to look at a variety of things. So obviously, capital expenditure is a big one. So if it costs too much and there's no return on investment, then it's not worth it. We looked at front office solutions, back office solutions, but really, as part of our ethos, we are a customer-focused retailer, and we wanted to put all of our effort into serving our customers on the front line and not having people in the back counting money and looking at solutions like that. So from our point of view, and it might not be the same for every retailer, that was our key focus point.
I guess the answer to one of the questions on the G4S presentation was that sometime, of course, my words, not theirs, by the way, is that clients might think and buy in a disjointed way. I guess there's always the potential here, because presumably this goes across several people's job responsibilities, the way you've described that. So what was the coming together bit? How did that happen?
It worked, I think, was the key element of it. We trialled it quite extensively. We wanted to prove that we could eradicate mistakes. We wanted to prove that we could remove labour and focus that effort and that money and that cost back into customer-facing parts of the business, and that we could still maintain the control that we had going into the process. So I think what was quite important for us was that if we'd taken a solution that took our accounting and money off-site, for example, we didn't have that local level of control and that local level of information as we needed on a day-to-day basis, which was still very important to us as a retailer. And bringing all these things together, we then came to the decision that this is what we want to do, and this worked for us.
Okay, one final question, then I'll give perhaps a chance to you two to come back if you wish. So I've got to ask this. Are you happy with the supplier?
Well, we've just rolled it out to 10,500 point of sales across our business. So we've been trialling it extensively for 18 months. We put it into our convenience market, and then we've rolled it into our larger stores. So we felt it was a scalable solution. It ticked the boxes we needed it to tick. It did what it said on the tin, I suppose, is the old adage. Yes. Okay. It'd be more interesting if you said no, wouldn't it? But there we go. Okay. Perhaps to ask both of you. I guess this sounds a very good sort of feedback, but in the real world, it's quite problematic, isn't it?
Sorry, the what?
In the real world, to try and you can theorise the problem, but to actually get solutions that work. There are plenty of implementation failures along the way. Do you see this as a surprising case study, or do you see this as something that could be more widely replicated, problematic? Your thoughts?
I think from the sort of end supplier's perspective, there's been a lot of energy and effort gone into these type of devices, such as intelligent safe, to the point where they do seem to be pretty robust, and therefore you're getting a product that actually works straight away and creates or solves a lot of issues for us, such as counterfeit management, because you're getting notes rejected at the point of sale rather than coming for us. And we obviously put resource into counterfeit notes, discrepancy management, because you're getting virtual removal of discrepancies, where again we've got quite a lot of staff who work with retailers working through those issues, and also production planning, because we have this thing on the Tuesday peak, which I'm sure people will be aware of. I go out to B&Q on a Sunday and spend my cash. The cash in transit companies pick it up on a Monday and give it to us on a Tuesday. The next logical step of this is if we can get the data and see what's coming, it makes our production planning a lot smoother. So.
Interesting. Okay. And Samir?
Sure. And in terms of would it stick, is it scalable? You just have to look around the world. I mean, this is there. Whether it's US, whether it's Africa, different parts of the world, these solutions exist. Drivers may be different. Africa, it may be more security. US may be different, but I guess the benefits of having a solution like that is increasingly being understood. And I must congratulate Morrisons on that they have probably the first large-scale implementation in UK. I mean, at that scale, I don't think any retailer has gone there. But having seen the benefits of it now, I believe people would follow. I believe there is a merit in having these devices in store. Clearly there is. And I think with time, it will just become more demonstrated. Okay, well, let's open this up to the floor.
your chance to ask any question, or if you want, just make a comment, both specifically about this or more generally, actually, about how you integrate solutions and make them work. Any comments or questions? Don't rush, but just put your hand up. Okay, please, you might have to stand up and shout, sorry. I was waiting for someone to give a microphone. Could you say who you are first, please? Could you just repeat the question? So that, yeah, it's okay.
Okay. So I think the question was around the sort of end-to-end process from the customer handing the note over to the cashier and then it going to the bank, basically, yeah. So previously what we had was a kind of antiquated process that basically the cashier puts the note into the till drawer, does some checks on it. There's a risk there that the note is a forgery. Then periodically they'll send that money to the cash office. Somebody else at the other end of the vacuum tube in the cash office empties the container, counts the money, processes it against the till, and that sort of cycle goes on and on before we periodically bank the money out and then it gets counted by Mark and Samir. Now what we do is at the point of sale, the note is inserted into a device, it validates the note, stores the note in a plastic pouch, and then at a set point in time, when we've set the limit at £3,000, we will choose to empty that pouch. So we empty the pouch out of trade, so we're not moving money during trade when there's risk to our colleagues and obviously to the money. And we probably empty 6 to 10 units a day in a large store that has about 30 tills. So probably each till will get about 3 days worth of takings before we actually empty it and then take the money to the cash office. The money's bundled into a sealed plastic pouch, so it's not tamper-proof by any manner of means. Somebody can bust it and steal it if they wanted to, but it's tamper-evident. And previously, a lot of the problems we had with banking discrepancies were that we would have the odd £10 note, the odd £20 note out of a bundle of money that goes to the bank, which is impossible to find. So we've eradicated completely our small banking discrepancies. We've also eradicated from within that any forgeries. So, you know, it doesn't actually get to the point that it gets to the bank anymore through our cash processing system. The back end of the system is the software that we see in the cash office, which allows us to see at any time what's in any of the units. But also we get reports of it on a daily basis that tells us what's in the units at that point in time that we can include in our floats. So we get daily till results, but also what we've removed from them the previous day. And that then drives the figures that we use to prepare the banking. So now preparing a banking is not counting money, it's taking half a dozen pouches out of the safe that somebody's put there the night before and taking the figures off of the computer and preparing the bank slip like that. So the preparation time for doing a banking is vastly reduced as well. So the big driver for us has really been labour.
It's really been, what was that last bit?
Labour.
Yeah.
Labour saving.
Okay. Does that answer your question okay? Okay, thank you. Do either of you want to make a comment on that? Just checking. Don't have to.
I think I'm good because it's Malcolm's process.
Exactly, exactly.
He's the best person to answer the question.
No, but you could have picked up and said, no, that's not right, and that would also be interesting. Okay, any other questions, please? Any, yes. Sorry, Frank, can I ask you, let me give you the microphone. You can...
So it's a question for Malcolm about in terms of the benefits. So are you saying that the benefits from the labour savings were greater than the reduction in shrinkage, or can you quantify or explain a bit more?
Vastly, yes. You know, if we're putting a ballpark figure on it, we reckon we're going to save in labour about £5 million a year.
That works.
And as far as shrinkage goes and as far as the detection of forgeries, so we've seen a threefold increase in forgeries in the last 2 years. probably just a sign of the times, a sign of the economy. So that's, to us, a bit of a softer benefit, but it's nowhere near the saving that we're going to see in labour. We have. That was one of the unfortunate consequences that we got to a stage, and it wasn't just the introduction of this equipment. It was sort of the end of the line of a lot of changes we've made over the last few years. So you go back 5 or 10 years in Morrisons, it was a very, very labour-intensive, hands-on process to deal with cash. We've introduced new systems, we've introduced new technology into the back office, we've now introduced the technology at the front end, and that's got us to a stage where we basically were unable to justify having a management position within the cash office. So yes, all of those positions were put at risk earlier on this year. Happily, about 50% of the people that were put at risk stayed with the business. 50% took redundancy for a number of reasons. So hopefully we've not done as bad as could have been out of it.
If I can just add to that, I mean, one is the benefits as we are seeing currently and the upside and downsides of that. But if you then look across the entire supply chain and look at what a technology like that can do, the information, discrepancy management at Voltex, having less people now looking at that cash because they are more sure about the quality of cash, having less people working on MI and trying to generate reports on ad hoc requests, and hence me not requiring it in terms of as many people working on those systems. So if you look at the entire supply chain, and I think that's the key focus, it's not about one element which is zoomed into anymore. It's about people looking at the entire supply chain and saying where are the efficiencies or inefficiencies that people can work on, that banks, processors, other suppliers can work on. And I guess that's where the opportunities are today.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Gentleman there, final question, Tim. Can you just repeat the question, Malcolm?
Okay, so have we seen more people going to cards? Are customers annoyed at the fact that we've introduced a complication, in effect, to the checkout process? No. So 80% of our cash transactions are single note transactions. So the note can be inserted into the unit as the cashier is talking to the customer about other things, dealing with things on their screen. At the moment, it's a completely separate system. It's not integrated with our EPOS system, so actually it's allowing us to do two things at once at the moment. We obviously trialled it quite extensively and looked at the impact on queuing times and on throughput times at the checkout, and we found no major impact, and we haven't seen any migration across to cards as a result of the implementation.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Just, I'm conscious, as I said this morning, my most important job is to make sure you don't go late to lunch. So I'm just going to ask any final comment that any of you want to make about this. Samir.
I think from a bank's perspective, I'll repeat what I've just said, which is that it's now coming together of various elements of the supply chain more than ever. And in that, the ask is playing a role, but what also is playing a role is just the openness in various parts of the supply chain to just work together. And I don't think we have seen that before. And that's making it possible.
Okay, Mark?
From the supplier perspective, this is the first step. I think as I suspect many more steps will be taken, we'll start to see the upside benefit of our cost reduction, which will again help the industry in terms of reducing the overall cost of cash transactions further.
Okay, and Malcolm, final comment?
Yeah, I think, in agreement with what the guys are saying there, it's very much the first step. It's a fledgling system as far as we are concerned. It's been in our estate now for less than 2 months, so we're still getting used to it very much so. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what it can do for us in the future and principally about the information it can provide us and being smarter and working smarter. and reducing cost out of our business, because other than putting the prices up and affecting our customer proposition, there's no other way of doing it than cutting cost.
Okay, well done. Well, Volumatic come out well out of that. They and G4S and the other exhibitors will be out there over lunch. We would encourage you to have a look around the exhibitors. I know many of you did at coffee break, and it was quite an engaging conversation. We couldn't get many of you back. That's a positive sign, I think. So do please enjoy your lunch. Now, the lunch is through the exhibit hall and just the other side. So you've got to walk past the exhibitors to get there. So do stop and chat to them on the way. Can I ask you finally before lunch just to thank the panel for their conversation? Thank you.